Biolab in South Carolina let 43 monkeys escape, and it just so happens those monkeys were being used for virus and bioweapon research. A biotech company just recently resurrected the dire wolf, and back in the 60s, a winged creature with glowing red eyes haunted a town for a year, then vanished just as soon as it appeared. These are times scientists created creatures they couldn't control. In November of 2024, chaos broke out at the Alpha Genesis Research Facility in Yamasee, South Carolina, when 43 rhesus macaque monkeys escaped after a caretaker reportedly left a door unlocked. The monkeys ran off into nearby wooded areas. 35 were rounded up pretty quickly, but 8 of them were on the loose for weeks. These macaques are very intelligent animals, and this was concerning because they can carry diseases transmissible to humans. So folks were pretty concerned as days turned into weeks. But what exactly were these monkeys being used for? Well, the facility does research involving viruses, bioweapons. So yeah, this was starting to sound like the beginning of Planet of the Apes. Meanwhile, animal rights groups were all over this, calling out the lab for being sloppy and putting the public at risk. And of course, they were already pissed about monkeys being tested on in the first place. In the end, all the monkeys were safely recaptured, but this was definitely not a good look. In early 2025, Colossal Biosciences made headlines after announcing that they had successfully brought back the direwolf, or something like it. Using advanced gene editing, they took gray wolf DNA and basically tweaked it until it resembled the long extinct direwolf. Bigger build, stronger jaws, different fur. Not exactly a clone, but close enough that it was a pretty big deal. The company called it de-extinction. Some scientists called it more of a Frankenstein DNA project, but either way, the animals are real. They're alive, and they're not planning to keep them in a lab forever. Colossal said the goal is to reintroduce these wolves into the wild at some point to restore balance to certain ecosystems, but that raised a ton of red flags. First off, no one really knows how they're going to behave in the real world. What happens if it mates with modern wolves, throws off the predator-prey balance? There's also the question of what happens if these things turn aggressive. Colossal insists that they got it under control, but when you're resurrecting an ancient predator in a lab, some people feel pretty iffy about it. Not me though, I think this is awesome. Between 1966 and 1967, people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia kept reporting something strange, a tall creature with glowing red eyes. It was humanoid, but it also had giant wings. They called it the Mothman. Some said it chased their cars, others claimed it flew over buildings or hovered near the old TNT plant outside of town. Dozens of reports came in over the course of about a year. Then in December 1967, the Silver Bridge suddenly collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. And this is when the Mothman legend really exploded, because some claimed that they'd seen the creature perched on the bridge just before the disaster. One of the biggest rumors surrounding the mysterious Mothman creature is that it was the result of a messed up government experiment. But whether it was a misidentified bird or something else entirely, nobody ever got a solid explanation. In April of 1973, a man named Henry McDaniel from Enfield, Illinois, called the police in a panic, saying that some bizarre creature had tried to break into his house. He said it had 3 legs, short arms, and glowing red eyes. He fired at it, but said it just jumped away unfazed. A few days later, some local kids said that they saw something similar near an abandoned house, and pretty soon word spread and people from outside the town started showing up, hoping to spot it. Some thought it might have been an escaped kangaroo. Others leaned into the weirder theories, like it being a government experiment that got loose, or something not of this world at all. Interestingly, the area was near a military base, so that definitely helped with the government experiment angle. Government tried to downplay the whole thing, of course, but people who saw it stuck to their stories. Even the cops admitted that McDaniel didn't seem like someone making things up. To this day, nobody really knows what happened that spring. In the summer of 1988, a teenager in Lee County, South Carolina, claimed that this huge creature attacked his car near Scape Ore Swamp. He said it was about 7 feet tall, covered in green, scaly skin, and had glowing red eyes. His car was damaged, there were these deep scratches all over it, and his side mirror was busted. Not to mention that the kid was clearly shaken up. Police wondered if he was just making up the story to cover up an accident, but this was a pretty lame excuse to come up with. I mean, a lizard monster attacking your car? They didn't pay it much attention, but after that, more people started coming forward with similar stories. One woman said something ripped the chrome off her car. Another man claimed he saw the thing staring at him from the edge of the swamp. Locals started calling this creature the Lizard Man. Police started looking into it now as more reports just kept rolling in. One of the sillier explanations at the time was that people were actually seeing a bear, which is a pretty lazy explanation. Again, there's an escaped lab experiment theory for this one as well. As fast as it started though, the sightings stopped. It's since become a local legend. As for what people were really seeing though, who knows? I can safely say it probably wasn't a bear though.
Now, if you were already scared of spiders, these ones will freak you out even more. The spiders here are radioactive as they build their webs to catch their prey. They add to the dangerous environment of the forest. These webs are not like normal spider webs. In fact, they are woven in abstract ways that suggest genetic mutation is at hand. Now, they're also highly radioactive themselves, making them a danger for any non-radioactive animal to touch. Now, who knew spiders could get 100 times scarier? But that's not the only scary mutated animal there. According to Slate in the early 90s, which was just a few years after the incident, radiation levels in the wild boar that died near Chernobyl were more than 2,000 times what's considered safe. And even today, eating animals from inside the exclusion zone is still pretty hazardous, as a person might be exposed to radiation levels that are dozens of times higher than what's safe. Then in 2016, a video went viral of a catfish swimming around the cooling pond of the Chernobyl power plant. Very few mutations lead to extra large size, explains University of South Carolina radiation specialist Dr. Timothy Masu. Instead, they grow less efficiently, they're less capable of catching food, and they tend to not live as long. Now that's why it's shocking that it's so large, and I would not want to mess with the fish that big. Then, as of 2015, there had been almost 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer reported in people who were exposed at the time of the incident. And approximately 5,000 of these thyroid cancers are likely attributed to them drinking fresh milk containing radioactive iodine from cows that had eaten contaminated grass in the first few weeks following the incident. Yep, you heard that right. The cows created radioactive milk. Now in 2018, it was said that Ukraine still has radioactivity levels up to 5 times the official safe limit, research suggests. Now scientists sampled cow's milk from private farms and homes in the Ravine region, about 125 miles away from the site of the catastrophic explosion. Researchers found levels of radioactive caesium in milk above Ukraine's safe limit for adults of 100 becquerel per liter at 6 of 14 settlements studied. Now the highest levels found were about 500 BQ liter, 5 times over the limit for adults, and more than 12 times that for the young. The study was carried out at the University of Exeter and the Ukrainian Institute of Agricultural Radiology. More than 30 years after the Chernobyl disaster, people are still routinely exposed to radioactive caesium when consuming locally produced staple foods, including milk, in Chernobyl-affected areas in Ukraine, said Dr. Irina Lebunska of University of Exeter. Though the level of soil contamination in the studied areas is not extremely high, radioactive caesium continues to accumulate in milk and other foods. Now this is just one of the lasting effects, which is horrific. On a lighter note though, an endangered wild horse is making a comeback thanks to Chernobyl. The Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute called the Przewalski's horses the last truly wild horse. Its once large population that ranged across large areas of Asia and Europe was eventually reduced to almost nothing. When Lee Boyd and Catherine A. Hope edited a book about the animal in 1994, the most recent wild sighting had occurred in the late 60s, leading the authors to declare them extinct in the wild. But British ecologists Mike Wood and Nick Beresford, who specialize in studying the effects of radiation on Chernobyl's wildlife, observed that the Przewalski's horses is thriving within the exclusion zone. In the late 1990s, about 30 of these horses were released in the Ukrainian side of the zone, and the population has increased to more than 200. Based on camera trap images, Wood estimated that some of the original horses, identified by their brand markings, are still alive, and photos of juvenile horses also indicate that the population is expanding. And Finally, if you didn't know, Earth has both a magnetic field and an atmosphere that protects us from dangerous radiation. Now, NASA knows that astronauts on the International Space Station get exposed to 20 times the radiation we get down here on the planet. So after discovering that a fungus thriving around the heavily radiated Chernobyl disaster site consumes radiation through radiosynthesis, they decided to experiment with it in space, and over the course of a month they found out that the fungus actually blocks radiation literally by eating it. The experiments on the ISS revealed that it was utilizing melanin to transform radioactive gamma rays into chemical energy. Now, this is actually really exciting because this ability may turn out to be useful in future space exploration. NASA is hoping that the fungus may be used to both shield equipment and the crew from deadly radiation during long space flights, and even more importantly, help clean up radioactive waste. Well, that's all for our list of unsettling creatures found in Chernobyl that won't stop growing. There are still crazy things going on in Chernobyl to this day, decades after the explosion of the reactor at the nuclear power plant in April 1986. Now, animals and nature have rightfully been affected in a big way. According to a study that began in 1991, the organisms responsible for decomposition and replenishing organic matter back into the ecosystem, such as insects, fungi, and microbes, are presenting symptoms of radioactive contamination, which isn't too shocking, but still isn't good. One of the most prominent areas of this effect has been called the Bloody Red Forest. It's a set of woodland where all the pine trees turned a blood red color right after the meltdown, and then died not long after. Now, it's pretty, don't get me wrong, but it's completely unnatural and has caused some issues. Now, 15 to 20 years after they were exposed to radiation and died, these trees were not decaying, when at this point, normal trees would be long gone. Due to this, scientists decided to run some tests by filling specially prepared garbage bags with leaf litter from uncontaminated areas, making sure there were no insects or decomposers present, and then leaving the bags out in both contaminated and uncontaminated wooded areas in the exclusion zone for nearly a year to check the decomposition rates of the leaves. Now, bags left in uncontaminated areas were as expected, with normal rates of decomposition between 70 to 90% of the leaves decomposing. But the leaves in contaminated areas retained 60% of their original weight, indicating much less activity by natural decomposers. Now, this suggests that the radiation exposure has a detrimental effect on the ability of the Chernobyl ecosystem to replenish itself with nutrients, which could be causing the stunting of tree growth that has been recorded. But with this comes another problem. The leaves in contaminated areas stayed intact and dry even after almost a year, and this could present a fire hazard, which in turn presents a danger of radioactive contaminants being spread outside the exclusion zone by forest fires. So that is scary and just not good at all. Then there's how this affected all the animals. According to a 2011 study in Biological Conservation, Chernobyl caused genetic mutations in plants and animals increased by a factor of 20. Among breeding birds in that region, rare species suffered disproportionate effects from the explosion's radiation compared to common species. Now, further research is needed to understand how the increased mutations affect species' reproductive rates, population size, genetic diversity, and other survival factors, but it definitely affected animals in a negative way. In 2016, a study found that the eastern tree frogs in the Chernobyl exclusion zone exhibited different characteristics than their neighboring cousins, and in 2023, another study discovered distinct genetic differences between Chernobyl dogs and dogs living only 10 miles away in Chernobyl City. Now, not all the animals living around Chernobyl are entirely wild, as there are around 900 stray dogs, mostly descended from those left behind when people evacuated the area. Veterinarians, radiation experts, and volunteers from a group called the Dogs of Chernobyl captured the dogs, vaccinated them against diseases, and tagged them. Now, in addition to the tags, some dogs are fitted with radiation detector collars. Now, the dogs offer a way to map radiation across the Chernobyl exclusion zone and study the ongoing effects of the accident. While scientists generally can't get a close look at individual wild animals in the zone, they can monitor the dogs closely, and they are, of course, radioactive. Visitors to the area are advised to avoid petting the dogs to minimize radiation exposure, no matter how cute they are. Now, these dogs have increased rates of cataracts because the eyes are the first tissues to show signs of chronic exposure to ionizing radiation. Now, not all is lost on these dogs though, as the unique genetic diversity of these dogs makes them ideal candidates for future studies, seeking to understand the long-term genetic health effects of highly radioactive environments on populations of large mammals, especially in understanding the biological underpinnings of human survival in regions of high and continuous environmental assault, the researchers said. So, I guess that's a plus. Then there's the birds. While there are plenty of them in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, 489 different species to be exact, they are examples of animals that still face problems from radiation exposure. A study of barn swallows from 1991 to 2006 indicated birds in the exclusion zone displayed more abnormalities than birds from a controlled sample, including deformed beaks, albinistic feathers, bent tail feathers, and deformed air sacs. Now, birds in the zone had less reproductive success, and these birds often had smaller brains, malformed sperm, and cataracts, presumably as a result of radiation-related genetic mutations.
In 2021, a biotech company called Oxitec released genetically modified mosquitoes in the Florida Keys. The goal was to reduce the population of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, which spread diseases like dengue and Zika. These lab-engineered male mosquitoes were designed to mate with wild females, passing on a gene that would prevent their offspring from surviving to adulthood. The idea was that over time the mosquito population would decline, but the plan didn't go exactly as planned. Some scientists were worried that the gene might not be as lethal as expected and that some offspring would survive and potentially create a hybrid population. And how would the reduction of one mosquito species affect predators or allow potentially more dangerous mosquito species to overpopulate? Even with these concerns though, the project moved forward and millions of genetically modified mosquitoes were released. It's only been a few years, so the long-term effects remain to be seen. In August of 1955, a woman named Naomi Johnson went swimming in the Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana, and came out with a story that's still being talked about today. She said something grabbed her from below, yanked her underwater, and tried to drag her down. She fought her way free and made it back to the surface, but her leg was covered in scratches and stained with this green slimy residue that wouldn't wash off for days. That alone would have made it a weird local mystery, but then it's just got stranger. Naomi later claimed a man in a military uniform came to her house, said he was with the US Air Force, and told her not to talk about what happened. No official report was filed and nobody could explain what she'd seen. Some people connect this to UFO sightings in the area around that time, saying it could have been part of a larger cover-up event. Others think that this was just a case of someone getting tangled up with a big fish or a log or seaweed. Still though, it doesn't really explain the military visit part. Very weird story. From the late 1990s up until 2013, people in the Swiss village of Mal kept reporting a strange figure walking through the woods. They called it Le Loyon, or the Ghost of Mal. Witnesses described it as a tall person in a military-style cloak wearing a creepy old-school gas mask. They'd be completely silent, never speaking, just walking the same path over and over. No one knew who or what this was. Then in 2013, someone finally snapped a photo. A few weeks later, the sightings stopped. All that was found was a pile of the costume left in the woods, along with a note that basically said the person behind it was sick of being harassed and misunderstood. Some say it was just a harmless eccentric who didn't want to be bothered. Others think it was performance art or some type of social experiment, but there's another theory that something was going on in those woods. I mean, why walk around in a gas mask unless there's a very good reason? Was there some sort of experiment going on? It's really strange, because if it was just a hoax, I mean, just, some weirdo dressing up to scare people, you'd think they would have called it quits way sooner, but this lasted over a decade. There are some real accidents connected to the Pope-like monster, but just what in the hell is the Pope-like monster? It's a creature said to haunt a train trestle bridge in Louisville, Kentucky. People who've claimed to see it describe some kind of goat-man hybrid, has hooves, fur, horns, and the face of a man. The story goes that it lures people onto the tracks using hypnosis or by mimicking people, and then they get hit by an oncoming train. It sounds pretty out there, but people have actually died on that bridge. The train line is active, and because of the legend, people started going there to try and spot the beast for themselves. In 2016, a young woman was killed while investigating the site where their boyfriend, another person, died years earlier under similar circumstances, and some say the creature is just a spooky story to scare kids away from a dangerous area, but the origin of the legend is still murky. It goes back decades with no clear first report. So was it made up entirely? Or did someone really see something weird out there in the woods once and the story just grew from there? Whatever the truth is, the combination of actual deaths and the eerie setting has helped keep the Pope-like monster legend alive. We've veered pretty far into the cryptozoology, urban legend realm, so let's talk about something a little more science-based and down to earth: synthetic biology in general. This is basically when scientists build or redesign living things from the ground up. Might tweak bacteria to make medicine or design microbes that eat plastic. It sounds helpful, and sometimes it is, but the problem is once you mess with life at that level, you can't always predict what's going to happen. There have been real concerns that some of these lab-made organisms could escape into the environment and do things they weren't intended to do, like spreading out of control, mutating, and wiping out other species. One example people talk about is modified yeast strains used to make biofuels, so tweaking the yeast genes so that it produces stuff like ethanol or other chemicals that can be used for fuel. Pretty cool. Even scientists working in this field admit that we're still figuring out the risks. Most of the time, things go as planned, but if just one of these creations gets out and starts doing something unexpected, things can spiral fast. Human-animal hybrid chimeras. That does not sound like a real thing, but it is. Human-animal hybrid chimeras are creatures that combine human and animal cell, resulting in organisms with both human and non-human characteristics. Imagine a being with the body of a pig, but with human brain cells. Crazy, but it does have its upsides when it comes to stem cell research and organ transplantation. But obviously there's some ethical things to consider, and there have been legal restrictions on this kind of research. In the United States, the Human-Animal Chimera Prohibition Act of 2016 was introduced to address some of these concerns. On August 22nd, 2016, Representative Christopher H. Smith put forth a bill that prohibits creating a human-animal chimera, transferring human embryos into non-human wombs, or vice versa. Penalties could be pretty severe: hefty fines and or imprisonment for up to 10 years. But the bill didn't end up getting passed. Humanzees. These are hypothetical hybrids of humans and chimpanzees. There are rumors and conspiracies about attempts being made to create them, but none have been 100% verified. Doesn't sound all that outlandish to me though. Obviously this type of experiment would be highly unethical, so it would make sense that there would be attempts to cover it up. The first and most infamous attempt to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid was spearheaded by a Soviet biologist, Ilya Ivanov. Ivanov had set out to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid as early as 1910. By the 20s, he was trying to artificially inseminate female chimpanzees to create part human, part chimp offspring. It didn't work, but his next plan was even more ambitious. He wanted to impregnate human women instead, but that's when the government supposedly stepped in and put a halt to his work. Then in the 70s, there was a chimpanzee named Oliver who became a bit famous when rumors started to spread that he might be part human. He had some unusual physical traits, an odd cranial shape, and he had freckles, but a genetic analysis in 1996 revealed that Oliver had the standard 48 chromosomes of a chimpanzee, not the 47 you'd find in a hybrid. So Oliver was just an unusually unique chimp. But stories about human-chimp hybrids don't end there. In 1981, a story came out about a chimpanzee being impregnated by a human in 1967 in China. A man named Ji Yongzheng, the head of the hospital in Shenyang, said that he'd been part of this experiment. According to him, the chimp was successfully impregnated but died from neglect when the Cultural Revolution disrupted the research, and scientists involved were sent away to farm labor. In 2019, there were also reports of a research team led by Professor Juan Carlos Espelza Belmont from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California having success with creating human-monkey chimeras. These embryos, which were only allowed to develop for a few weeks, were reportedly created in China to sidestep legal restrictions in the States. They weren't allowed to develop past the early stages in order to avoid more ethical issues. Let's talk about ligers. A liger is a hybrid cross between a male lion and a female tiger. Unlike chimeras, ligers aren't the result of genetic splicing or more complicated science experiments. Instead, this is just straightforward breeding. With that said though, there's still a ton of controversy with this. Ligers are often larger than either parent species thanks to a phenomenon called hybrid vigor. This means they can grow to be enormous, often reaching sizes beyond even the largest lions or tigers, and they can be very strong. But the major issues with ligers is their health. They usually have a whole list of physical problems, like joint issues, organ problems, and a lot of this has to do with their rapid growth and the fact that obviously they're not really supposed to exist. Plus, these things only exist in captivity. Ligers are bred for spectacle. Breeding ligers is legal in many places, but it's heavily scrutinized and of course illegal in others. Glowfish were the first genetically modified pets. They're a zebrafish that glow in the dark. Glowfish were developed in 1999 by scientists who inserted a gene from a jellyfish into a zebrafish. This gene causes the fish to produce a fluorescent protein, making them glow under ultraviolet light. Now, originally these fish were created to help detect environmental pollutants. If the water was contaminated, the fish would change color. But the glowing fish just looked so cool that companies started seeing dollar signs. Legally, glowfish are somewhat of a gray area. They were first marketed in Singapore, where the regulations on GMOs were more lenient. When they were introduced to the United States in 2003, there was a lot of controversy. Some thought they were neat, little nifty novelties. Others had concerns about the ethics of creating genetically modified pets and the impacts they could have on nature if they were to escape into the wild. Glowfish are legal and available to buy in a lot of places, but they're banned or restricted in others. For example, California has specific regulations when it comes to the sale and transport of genetically modified organisms, and glowfish were banned there for a long time. I think they may be legal now though. If anyone's from California in the audience, please let me know.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the gar. A gar is a species of wild cattle that is native to South Asia and Southeast Asia, and unfortunately they're listed as a vulnerable species on the IUCN Red List, and they have been since 1986. This is exactly why, in 2001, scientists decided it was time to try and clone one. With a population that has declined over 70% in the last 3 generations, they seemed like a perfect candidate to become the first ever endangered species to be cloned. In 2001, at the Trans-Ova Genetics Center in Sioux Center, Iowa, they were able to birth a clone gar. They obviously used gar DNA, but used a domestic cow as a surrogate mother to carry the clone. This of course was a huge breakthrough, but unfortunately the life of the gar was cut short as the calf passed away within 48 hours of its birth. Although this is obviously terrible, I guess the upside is that it is believed that the calf passed due to dysentery, which is not thought to have been related to the cloning process, which does mean that although the outcome wasn't as predicted or hoped, the cloning could still be considered a success. In our number 4 spot today, we have Injaz. With a name that means achievement, she clearly was exactly that, because Injaz was the first camel clone ever produced. She was born back in 2009 at the Camel Reproduction Center in Dubai, and she certainly was a proud accomplishment for all of those who worked to create and raise her. In fact, the cloning of Injaz was such a success that she lived for over a decade. Her birth prompted the center to continue cloning camels, which they did about 20 to 25 times a year in the time after Injaz was born. She broke ground once again when she proved that cloned camels could in fact conceive and give birth naturally, and she did so a few times, but in the end it would be this that led to her demise. On her 4th calf, as she carried it, it grew to be too big for her to carry, which unfortunately led to dystocia late in her pregnancy. Scientists did their best to save her, but unfortunately they lost both of them. Everyone who worked to care for Injaz was rightfully extremely upset at her passing, but they clearly used her and her success as a starting point for what was to come. Now the center is turning out dozens of cloned camels every year, some going for $55,000. Not sure how I feel about that, but you know, whatever. In our number 3 spot today, we have the bantang. Back in 2003, scientists at the Advanced Cell Technology of Worcester, Massachusetts were ecstatic when they successfully birthed a clone bantang, which is an endangered species of cattle. To do this, they actually took frozen tissues from a male of the species that passed away many years earlier in 1980. They used these skin cells and inserted the nuclei into cow eggs, and a cow was used as a surrogate mother. They attempted this with 16 pregnancies, 2 of which came to term. With the success of one clone did come the birth of another identical twin who was born to a different cow mother, but despite being carried to term and birth, this clone was not as expected. It was twice the normal birth weight, which quickly proved to be a very negative sign. As for the clone who was considered a success, it was hand-raised at the San Diego Wild Animal Park's Infant Isolation Unit. Unfortunately, however, due to an injury that the animal got when it was less than 7 years old, it did end up passing away, which meant that sadly the clone only lasted for about half the expected lifespan for this species of animal. In our number 2 spot today, we have the woolly mammoth. We would certainly be missing a very important animal on this list if we didn't include the woolly mammoth. These guys were of course a species of mammoth, and in fact they were one of the last in line of the mammoth species. Because of the fact that in both Alaska and Siberia there were frozen carcasses discovered, they're actually one of the most well-studied extinct creatures. Exactly why or how they were driven to extinction is widely debated, and another thing people like to debate is whether or not we should try and bring them back. There was a genome project completed in 2015, and since then it has been proposed the species could be revived through a few different means, but no one has yet taken the leap. Here's the thing though, there's a new company that is pretty set on de-extincting woolly mammoth, and they have a new investor. This investor is called In-Q-Tel, and they are registered as a non-profit venture capital firm that is funded by the CIA. They claim that the interest in this company is less about mammoths and more about the capability to do such crazy projects. I know this is more like a future project that might happen, but when we're talking about a huge animal like the woolly mammoth, we have to bring it up. Okay, I live in Canada. That's where the woolly mammoth would also live, I feel like. I don't know. I feel like it just has consequences for me, so I'm concerned. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Morian viviparous tree snail. This was a species of air-breathing tropical land snails that were endemic to French Polynesia, and their near extinction was caused by a chain of events that happened after something humans did. The African land snail was introduced into Tahiti in 1967 as a food source, but it quickly escaped and began to destroy crops. Biologists wanted to attempt to control the African land snail, so they decided to introduce the rosy wolf snail to the area in 1977. This went absolutely haywire, as the rosy wolf snail didn't just control the population of African land snails, but rather started to eradicate all of the snails that were native to the area, which of course includes our little friend. So this one little introduction led to them being totally extinct in the wild. These snails still exist in captivity, and there have been attempts to re-release them into the wild, maybe clone them to boost their population numbers, but unfortunately the rosy wolf snail continues to prey upon them, so at this point researchers are unsure if it will ever be possible for them to live in the wild again. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have voles. Voles. Those tiny furry rodents that look like they could be the star in a Disney movie have a dark secret in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. They are the victims of their own diet. These creatures love mushrooms, and unfortunately some mushroom species in the area are excellent at soaking up radiation like sponges. The result? Voles in radioactive hotspots show alarming trends. They're less fertile, their populations are dwindling, and their tiny eyes are developing cataracts at an unnaturally high rate. These symptoms highlight just how deeply radiation works its way through the food chain, showing no mercy even to the smallest forest residents. Next, we are talking about the mutated wolves. Wolves are not just surviving, they're actually thriving in Chernobyl's ghostly forests. Not only this, but they might actually be holding a secret that could help humanity. Studies by a Princeton University team revealed that these predators possess altered immune systems, potentially making them more resistant to cancer. Blood samples showed that their DNA has adapted in very unique ways, allowing them to tolerate the radiation-filled environment. Researchers believe these wolves could offer clues to combat cancer in humans. It's quite the twist of fate that the very landscape that should have destroyed them might have transformed them into something extraordinary. Next, we are talking about swallows. Barn swallows darting through the Chernobyl exclusion zone are more than just survivors of a nuclear disaster. They're carriers of a microscopic phenomenon that defies all logic. Nestled within their bodies are bacteria that have developed an extraordinary resistance to gamma radiation. These bacterial hitchhikers, exposed to generations of radioactive stress, have adapted in ways that turn one of nature's most destructive forces into a manageable environmental factor. Researchers have observed that these bacteria not only survive in high radiation conditions, but they actually thrive, suggesting that the disaster created an evolutionary pressure cooker that selected these near indestructible microbes. These microorganisms are effectively rewriting the rules of survival at the cellular level, raising questions about the adaptability of life in extreme conditions. Could this be a blueprint for how life might evolve in radioactive environments on other planets, or in the aftermath of nuclear catastrophes elsewhere? Next, we are talking about the lynx. The Eurasian lynx, long thought extinct in Europe, has staged a surprising return in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. With humans gone, these elusive cats have reclaimed their territory, thriving in the irradiated forests. While their radioactive exposure is unknown, scientists believe their radiation levels match other animals inside of the zone. Hundreds now roam the area, a long way from the extinction that people had thought. It is very clear that Chernobyl has shown us the unexpected consequences of a nuclear disaster and how nature has bounced back in ways that no one even thought was possible. These predators have turned Chernobyl into their sanctuary, a radioactive kingdom where humanity no longer rules. In our number 6 spot today, we have the radioactive boars. The wild boars of Chernobyl are spreading. It sounds like a terrifying zombie movie, and honestly, it kind of is. These radioactive animals roam beyond the exclusion zone, mingling with non-radioactive boars, and then sometimes ending up as food for unsuspecting humans. In 2017, a third of wild boars tested in Germany showed radiation levels too dangerous for consumption thanks to their love of radioactive mushrooms. The boar's mobility ensures that Chernobyl's legacy continues to spread far beyond its borders, turning an ordinary forest hunt into a potential brush with disaster.
Przewalski's horses are a rare species. One of the last truly wild horse breeds left on Earth. Native to the steppes of Central Asia, these horses were on the verge of extinction, but there have been a few attempts made to get their population back to a healthy place. In 1998, an experiment took place in the wake of the most disastrous nuclear accident in history, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The vast area around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had been evacuated due to radiation, and was then transformed into a sort of nature reserve with only a small handful of humans inhabiting the area. It seemed like the perfect place to release 31 of these endangered horses. Today, these horses have not only survived, but thrived. By 2019, their population in the Chernobyl zone had grown to over 100. And are there some possible negative consequences thanks to radiation? Possibly, but probably better than human tampering. Obviously, considering how rare these horses are and the conservation efforts being made, people aren't allowed to mess with these horses. Unfortunately though, poaching has been an issue and it's taken a bit of a toll on their numbers. Alright, next up is genetically modified salmon, produced by a company called Aqua Bounty Technologies. Now, this one is different from others on the list because there aren't restrictions on them, but there really should be, and I'll explain why. So these are the first genetically modified salmon approved by the FDA for commercial production and consumption. Aqua Bounty Technologies took genes from 2 other fish, Pacific Chinook salmon and the ocean pout, and inserted them into the Atlantic salmon's DNA. But why? Well, the goal was to create salmon that grow about twice as fast as regular salmon do. Instead of just growing seasonally like natural salmon, these guys grow all year round. So they're available on your plate all the time. Very convenient, but not everyone is on board with this. One big worry is what might happen if these GM salmon were to escape into the wild. Even though the FDA insists that this is not a concern because the salmon are raised in controlled environments and are sterile females that can't even produce anyway, a lot of people just don't want to eat genetically modified food. Well, alright, big deal, just don't buy them then. Well, that's the issue. The Aqua Advantage salmon doesn't have to be labeled as genetically modified because according to the FDA, there are no biological differences between it and the non-GMO salmon. So if you're trying to avoid GMO foods, you might not even know you're eating one. In 2015, a team of scientists from South Korea and China successfully created what they called double-muscled pigs by editing a single gene, the myostatin gene, or the MSTN, which naturally regulates muscle growth. By turning off this gene, they created these very jacked pigs. The goal is to have these pigs approved for human consumption, but that didn't end up happening. The idea is pretty straightforward. In theory, modify the genes to create meatier pigs and other animals like cows and goats. Sounds like a dream for the meat industry, but in practice things get a lot messier. When CRISPR is used to edit the genes, it's often done by first altering individual cells from the animal's skin, then using cloning techniques to turn these cells into embryos. The cloning process can create a lot of problems. For example, in China, out of 900 genetically engineered pig embryos, only 8 survived with the desired genetic changes. Many of the piglets that did survive were born with severe health problems, like thickened tongues, and many didn't make it past their first few months. GMO mosquitoes. These little critters are designed to help fight diseases like malaria, but like with everything on this list, there is some controversy here as well. One of the big selling points of GMO mosquitoes is their potential to reduce populations of disease-carrying mosquitoes over time. The idea is to release genetically modified male mosquitoes that are designed to outcompete wild males for mates. The offspring of these matings won't survive to adulthood, gradually lowering the mosquito population that carries diseases. Field tests have shown that these GMO mosquitoes don't appear to have any major impact on humans. They're engineered to target specific mosquito species, which means the risks to other species or humans seems minimal. Another advantage is that introducing GMO mosquitoes doesn't involve pesticides. This is a big one for those concerned about harmful chemicals being released into the environment. Now, on the flip side, these modified insects could carry or even develop unknown pathogens that might be harmful to humans. There's also criticism that not enough long-term testing has been done to understand their full impact. There's also a fear that these GMO mosquitoes might mutate into a form that could reproduce, which could create a new set of problems. This last one is quite dubious. The flying umbuku lizard. So the story goes that scientists in Zimbabwe managed to unlock a dormant genetic trait in the umbuku lizard, a small, rare reptile supposedly native to Africa. The lizard is believed to be a descendant of the pterodactyl, the prehistoric flying reptile. So these scientists were able to reawaken a flying strand of DNA that had lain dormant for millions of years. And the result, they created the flying umbuku lizard. To date, apparently, only 6 of these flying lizards have been produced, and they're kept completely separate from the regular umbuku lizards, just to make sure there's no crossbreeding between the genetically modified lizards and the non-modified ones. I can't find a lot of info on this one. I'm not so sure I buy it. But what do you all think? Let us know down in the comments.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the two-headed calf. In the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, the exclusion zone became a breeding ground for some of the most bizarre and terrifying animal mutations in history. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the birth of a two-headed calf. Farmers near Chernobyl were stunned when they witnessed an animal with not one, but 2 fully formed heads and underdeveloped limbs, a grotesque reminder of the disaster's enduring legacy. Scientists immediately linked this horrifying mutation to the intense radiation that not only killed life in the area, but also twisted the very DNA of surviving species. As the impact of radiation altered the fetal development of these animals, this calf's survival became a tragic symbol of how nature was forced to adapt in the face of devastation. Over time, chilling photos of the two-headed calf circulated, serving as a haunting visual of the unseen toll the disaster took on the natural world, forever etching this mutation into Chernobyl's dark and twisted history. The disturbing sight of this calf is just one of the many strange and horrifying mutations found in the zone, proof that Chernobyl's legacy is still alive in the most startling and unnerving ways. Next, we are talking about the glowing spiders. Deep in the eerie forests of Chernobyl, something straight out of a horror movie is happening. Spiders, those creepy creatures we're already wary of, started crafting glowing webs in the radioactive wastelands. But this isn't just some freakish mutation, it's an odd twist of nature's ability to adapt. The radioactive particles creeping through the area have infiltrated these arachnids, altering the very makeup of their silk and causing it to glow under UV light like a neon sign of doom. It's both chilling and amazing at the same time, a very bizarre, fluorescent testament to how radiation doesn't just destroy, it it rewires every part of the environment. Despite the terrifying look of these glowing webs, the spiders seem to be thriving, proving once again that life in Chernobyl might be twisted beyond recognition, but it's certainly not backing down. Next, we are talking about the gigantic catfish of the Pripyat River. No one cruising along the Pripyat River expects to come face to face with freshwater behemoths that could dwarf a grown adult, but that's exactly what lurks beneath these murky waters. Catfish measuring a jaw-dropping 9 feet or more have become a bizarre local legend, their enormous shadows drifting beneath the submerged ruins of old docks and tangled reeds. The strange truth is that these giants aren't sporting visible mutations like extra fins or gnarled faces. What's unsettling is the sheer scale of their growth. Without normal predators around, and with radioactive contaminants subtly affecting their environment, these fish have been free to balloon to unbelievable proportions. They've essentially taken full advantage of their strange new world, transforming from ordinary river dwellers into something that feels more at home in a monster movie. Such extremes of size raise uneasy questions about what the radiation may be doing to the entire food chain and how nature warps when left to wander uncharted territory. Next, we are talking about the albino moose. Nothing quite rattles the senses like catching a glimpse of a massive snow-white moose quietly stepping through the abandoned woodlands around Chernobyl. With their unusual earthy browns seemingly washed out, these pale giants cut ghostly silhouettes against broken fences and crumbling buildings. Scientists believe this unnatural albinism is directly tied to radiation tinkering with the genes that produce skin and fur pigment. What makes these eerie creatures so unsettling is how easily they blend into the Fallout's strange new normal. Towering figures that have adapted to become haunting, colorless symbols of the region's invisible scars. Each measured step through the underbrush feels like a chilling reminder that even the toughest inhabitants of this land have been reshaped in ways that defy both logic and expectation. Next, we are talking about the birds with deformed beaks. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a tiny swallow struggle to pick up the simplest seed because its beak curves at an impossible angle. In Chernobyl's exclusion zone, researchers have reported sparrows and swallows sporting twisted, elongated beaks that look more like poorly bent wire than a sleek feeding tool. These deformities aren't just cosmetic, they can make it nearly impossible for birds to gather enough food, threatening their chances of survival. Scientists link these bizarre changes to genetic damages from lingering radiation, the same invisible force that's quietly reshaping the area's entire ecosystem. These deformed beaks aren't just a tragedy for the birds themselves, but a glaring symbol of how nature, when exposed to something as catastrophic as nuclear fallout, veers down a path it's not supposed to follow. At our number 5 spot and halfway mark, we have the eagles. The lynx isn't the only one making a huge comeback. The mighty white-tailed eagles, endangered across much of Europe, are making quite the appearance in Chernobyl. These birds, perched atop abandoned watchtowers, add to the ghostly atmosphere of the exclusion zone. While their populations are growing, which is great, they are not immune to radiation's effects. Researchers have found tumors, beak deformities, and lower fertility rates in some of the zone's 249 bird species. Yet, the eagles still continue to flourish, reclaiming a land stripped of human interference but still full of invisible dangers. Next, we are talking about mutated spiders. Spiders are bad enough when they're normal. Mutated spiders are the stuff of nightmares. The spiders of Chernobyl's Red Forest are spinning webs that seem straight out of a horror movie. Their webs are oddly shaped, with chaotic patterns suggesting some very mysterious genetic mutations at play, and even more disturbing, these webs are radioactive themselves, laced with particles that have settled into the environment over decades. The spiders and their prey live and die in these toxic traps, creating a macabre cycle of contamination that illustrates how deeply radiation has seeped into even the tiniest details of life in the zone. In our number 3 spot today, we are talking about bison. The hulking bison of Chernobyl's exclusion zone, weighing up to a staggering 2,200 pounds, are living symbols of nature's resilience, but also its vulnerabilities. These majestic creatures graze on vegetation laced with radioactive particles absorbed from the soil. Every mouthful of grass or bark adds to their radiation load as isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 continue to circulate through the ecosystem decades after the disaster. Their sheer size and strength make them nearly invincible to predators, but radiation exposure has its own invisible consequences. Researchers have raised concerns about the long-term effects on their health and reproduction, including potential mutations, weakened immune systems, and shortened lifespans. Even more unsettling is the role these bison play in spreading the contamination. As they roam through the exclusion zone, their movements redistribute radioactive particles. Despite the risks, like many of the other animals, the bison have found a strange kind of sanctuary in this human-free wilderness. Their numbers are growing, and conservationists cautiously monitor their progress, marveling at how one of Europe's rarest animals has adapted to an environment hostile to most life forms. Next, we are talking about invertebrates. From one of the largest animals to some of the smallest, beneath the soil of Chernobyl's forests, the tiny creatures are waging a quiet battle for survival. Populations of bumblebees, butterflies, and grasshoppers have plummeted in areas with high radiation. The radioactive soil, saturated with cesium-137 and strontium-90, interferes with their ability to lay viable eggs, cutting off future generations. These losses ripple up the food chain, affecting everything from birds to small mammals. Invertebrates' decline is a reminder that radiation's most devastating impacts often begin with the smallest players in an ecosystem. And finally, to end off this list, in our number one spot, we are talking about fungi. For this one, we are heading right inside the heart of the reactor itself, the place where this all really started. Deep within the reactor's ruins, black fungi cling to life on the walls of the destroyed core itself. Species like Cryptococcus neoformans and Cladosporium don't just survive radiation, they actually use it as an energy source. Researchers have discovered that these fungi contain melanin, a pigment that absorbs ionizing radiation and turns it into chemical energy, much like plants use sunlight in photosynthesis. This ability, dubbed radiotropism, is as unsettling as it is fascinating, raising questions about what other life forms might adapt to survive in similarly extreme conditions.
A two-headed brown trout was found in a creek in southern Idaho, and it wasn't the only deformed fish in the area. Scientists found more trout with facial deformities, twisted fins, and defective eggs, and it all pointed to one thing: selenium pollution. Selenium is a metal that shows up naturally in the environment, but when it builds up from things like mining or coal burning, it becomes toxic. In this case, the pollution was traced back to operations run by J.R. Simplot, a massive agribusiness company that processes food and chemicals. They funded a study to look into the deformities, and while the report claimed that the selenium levels were safe, others strongly disagreed. Joseph Scoripa, a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, said the study was biased and, quote, highly questionable. He pointed out that it completely skipped over the effects on birds and reptiles and seriously downplayed the deformity rates in fish. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, politicians started pushing bills to deregulate selenium altogether. See, the coal industry has a stake in this too. What's happening in one Idaho creek is just one part of a much bigger picture. There's this fish called the Clear Lake hitch that only lives in Clear Lake, California, and some of them have developed a mutation known as pug-headedness, which you can probably form a pretty clear image of in your head. They end up with steep, almost boxy foreheads, bulging eyes, and an underdeveloped upper jaw. Basically, the top half of the mouth doesn't grow right, so it ends up shorter than the bottom, making the whole face look warped. Scientists think this is thanks to pollution, mainly from pesticides and mercury that have built up in the lake over time. The hitch used to be everywhere in this area. They were a big part of the diet for indigenous tribes like the Pomo, and back in the day you could see massive runs every spring. These days, even in a good year, only a few thousand show up to spawn. Some years, barely any. Out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, there's this tiny, deep pool called Devil's Hole. It looks like just a weird blue hole in the ground surrounded by dry rocks, but it's actually a deep water-filled crack in the earth, kind of like a natural well. And inside this tiny pool lives one of the rarest fish in the world, the Devil's Hole pupfish. These fish are tiny, smaller than your pinky finger, and they've been living here for thousands of years. The water is warm, nearly 90 degrees, and has very little oxygen. The fish need that exact setup to survive. It's a very specific environment, but they've adapted perfectly. Until recently. Right now, there are only about 75 of these fish left, and scientists are worried. Their genes are a mess. Scientists have found what's called genetic load. Basically, these fish are drowning in bad DNA, and there's no way for natural selection to clean it out. This leads to what's called an extinction vortex, where the genetic problems make it even harder to survive. Back in the 70s, conservationists built backup tanks to protect the pupfish in case the wild ones died out. But at one of these tanks, some pupfish from a nearby but different species snuck in. Their babies mixed with the DNA and grew way faster and healthier, even sprouting extra fins. The hybrids exploded in number, which showed biologist Andy Martin that introducing new genes was probably the solution here. Martin thinks the Devil's Hole pupfish could be saved if they bring in a few of these cousins from a spring just a few miles away. But some conservationists hate this idea. To them, it's not really saving this specific species of fish if you're changing their DNA. Nanosilver. That sounds like an anime attack, but this is a real particle causing mutations in fish. Silver nanoparticles, tiny particles smaller than viruses, are used in over 200 consumer products because they kill bacteria on contact. Scientists are now worried these little particles might be messing with the environment and wildlife. When silver nanoparticles wash down drains, they end up in rivers and lakes. Darren Ferguson, a researcher at the University of Utah, tested these particles on zebrafish embryos in the lab and found some pretty scary mutations. Some of them became, quote, extremely distorted, almost making a number 9 or a comma instead of a linear fish, he said. The particles caused deformities in eyes, tails, and most disturbingly, their hearts. And here's something pretty scary. Zebrafish actually have organs kinda similar to ours, so this could hint at risks for people too. Scientists still don't know exactly what this means for us or the planet long term, but the Environmental Protection Agency said the same special properties that make nanoscale materials useful are also properties that may cause some nanoscale materials to pose potential risks.
Next, we are talking about the black frogs. Out of all the strange and eerie changes in Chernobyl's exclusion zone, the sighting of pitch black frogs might be one of the most unsettling. Eastern tree frogs, once a vibrant green, now sport deep inky black skin, blending into the desolate landscape like shadows. This isn't just a freak accident, instead it's an eerie form of adaptation. Scientists believe that these frogs' dark skin acts as a natural shield, protecting them from the radiation still lingering in the soil and the air. By absorbing less harmful energy, their blackened color may give them a surprising survival edge in this nuclear-scarred environment. But while this adaptation could be seen as a victory for biology, it's also a reminder of just how deeply the forces of nature can alter life when pushed to the brink, forcing creatures to evolve in ways we can barely comprehend. In our number 4 spot today, we have the wolves with strange fur patterns. There's something jarring about locking eyes with a wolf whose coat looks as if it's been crudely repainted by nature's own shaky hand. Within Chernobyl's silent forests, some wolves now sport baffling fur patterns, patches that never grew back, odd stripes where there should be solid gray, and splotches of color that defy any recognizable pattern. Scientists suspect that these peculiar coats hint at deeper, invisible changes within their DNA, possibly caused by the relentless radiation that seeped into every inch of their environment. What's truly surprising, though, is that the wolves aren't just surviving. They're actually thriving. In a world abandoned by humans, they've staked their claim as top predators, hunting in small packs and darting through ruined buildings like ghosts. Next, we are talking about the mutated wild boars. It's one thing to stumble across a wild boar in the forest, but discovering one with bizarrely shortened legs, an overgrown head, and tusks twisting at unnatural angles is another level entirely. In Chernobyl's exclusion zone, these heavy-set animals have soaked up a cocktail of radioactive isotopes, contaminating their bodies and warping their development in startling ways. Some boars appear top-heavy and clumsy, as if their own skeletons are struggling to keep pace with the genetic mischief unleashed by the fallout. While not every individual shows such blatant distortions, enough of them do to leave an unsettling impression. These creatures are shaped by an environment that continues to bend the rules. Each gnarled tusk and awkward limb stands as a living reminder that radiation does not fade quietly. It leaves its fingerprint on every generation that must somehow learn to survive in its shadow. Next, we are talking about the insects without wings. It's hard to wrap your head around a butterfly that can't take flight, yet that's exactly what researchers are finding in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. Delicate creatures like butterflies and moths, once symbols of gentle transformation, now struggle with stunted wings that look half-grown or never form at all. Instead of fluttering gracefully over the tangled fields, some are left crawling on the ground, vulnerable and off balance. Scientists believe the radiation's relentless tinkering with genetic material disrupts critical stages of growth, leaving wings twisted or completely absent. It's an unsettling sight that strips these insects of their most defining feature. And finally, ending off this list today, we are talking about Przewalski's horse. These horses first originated in Mongolia and were wild horses that became endangered. They first became endangered due to hunters who would often kill the stallion, which of course would provide many difficulties in terms of reproduction. These horses also weren't doing very well in captivity, which made things even more difficult. This, combined with the harsh winters which would often claim their lives, left things looking quite grim for the species. In the late 1990s, however, in an effort to help repopulate these animals, 30 of them were released into the Ukrainian side of the exclusion zone, and it is believed that some of these original horses are actually still alive today, which is amazing, but camera trap images have also shown young horses and foals, which means they are repopulating, which is a huge win. They're expanding population in such a harsh environment, which could mean that they might potentially be able to return from the brink and go on to continue as a species, which is something we always want to see. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Dolly the sheep. We had to start this list off with Dolly today because she really set the stage for everything on this list to come. You may have heard of Dolly the sheep before, and that is because she made history in 1996 when she was born. This is because she was the very first mammal to be cloned from an adult somatic cell. The process of cloning to create her involved nuclear transfer from a cell taken from the mammary gland. Basically, they transferred the nucleus from the adult cell into an unfertilized premature egg that had its nucleus removed, and boom, cloned sheep. This was huge for the scientific community because of the fact that it not only showed that cloning can be successful in mammals, but also because it showed that a cloned organism can be produced from a mature cell from a specific body part. While Dolly made history, she also sadly only lived a relatively short life. She ended up being euthanized just before her 7th birthday because of the fact that she had a progressive lung disease as well as arthritis, both of which are said not to be linked to her cloning origins. I guess it's kind of cool that Dolly existed, and the fact that we have these scientific abilities is amazing, but there's also something pretty ominous about it. I just hope we use these powers to do things like bringing back extinct animals, maybe, rather than some weird, mad scientist type of stuff. In our number 9 spot today, we have Samrupa. After the birth of Dolly the sheep, scientists everywhere began trying their hand at cloning, and that is when Samrupa was born. Back in 2009, Samrupa was born in India and was a Murrah buffalo, which is known as being the best known milking buffalo, since these animals can be capable of producing 35 kilograms of milk a day. The birth of Samrupa marked a breakthrough in the country because it put India on the map as one of the few countries at the time who had the capabilities to clone, and this was all done using a new at the time landmark technique which was called hand-guided cloning. The scientists who helped to create Samrupa worked on the calf for 4 years, so it's clear that they were all very excited about about its birth. Unfortunately, however, shortly after Samrupa's birth, things went seriously wrong. Just 5 days after birth, Samrupa unfortunately succumbed to a lung infection and passed away. While the scientists weren't able to save the animal, it is very clear that its birth and short life helped scientists in remarkable ways that went on to inform them in future experiments and projects. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenean ibex is an animal that went extinct around 2000. In a horrible turn of events, the last one was a female named Celia, and she was killed in an awful falling tree incident. A subspecies of the Spanish ibex, the Pyrenean ibex were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. This is due to two things: being hunted, as well as the spread of human disease. Flash forward to 2003, however, and scientists tried to bring them back to life. This is the first extinct creatures that scientists ever tried to clone. That is absolutely crazy. For 7 minutes. DNA from Celia, the last living individual of the species, was taken and implanted into the womb of a domestic goat. From here, the clone was in fact born, but due to lung complications was unable to survive for longer than 7 minutes. It was a short life, but a monumental one that definitely broke new ground in the scientific world. In our number 7 spot today, we have Garima 1. Garima is similar to Samrupa that we already talked about, and in fact she was born in the same place, the National Dairy Research Institute, just shortly after Samrupa, and luckily her birth did end up being more successful considering she made it past the first year of life. She was actually cloned on June 6th, 2009, and things seemed to be going quite well until around June and July of 2011. Garima was created through the same hand-guided cloning technique as Samrupa, so it's clear that the technique was evolving and getting better, but things still unfortunately went awry. When things took a turn for the worst, doctors struggled to figure out exactly what was the problem, but eventually it was revealed that her problem was with her heart. Researchers revealed that her heart was abnormally overweight and much larger in size than other buffaloes her same age, and this likely led to the complications she faced that sadly culminated in her passing in August of 2011. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Argali. In the earlier days of cloning experiments, scientists attempted to clone an Argali, which is also known as a type of mountain sheep. These sheep are known to roam the highlands of western East Asia, the Himalayas, Tibet, and the Altai Mountains. The reason they wanted to clone these sheep is because they are important to the ecosystems they live in, and unfortunately they are a threatened species. Now, I know there's controversy over the cloning of threatened or extinct species, but personal opinions aside, they were making this attempt to see if this could be a viable way to potentially save a species. Unfortunately, however, these attempts would prove to be futile. Using the same techniques used in the instance of Dolly the sheep, the somatic cell nuclear transfer, while they believed it would be promising, all attempts to clone the mammal failed to produce any viable results, and thus modern science wasn't able to assist in the continuation of this species. But in good news, while the species is still threatened, it is still around and not quite endangered, although its life is mainly threatened due to trophy hunters and ranchers.
In California's Kesterson Reservoir, a big environmental problem popped up because of selenium pollution. Selenium is a naturally occurring element, but when it builds up too much, it becomes toxic. In Kesterson, the water got contaminated with high selenium levels, mainly from irrigation runoff. The fish there, especially embryos, started coming out with serious deformities. Some had messed up eyes or were just missing them completely. There were deformities in their fins, the brain. Scientists call this cluster of problems Kesterson syndrome. And it's not limited to fish because the birds eating them also suffered. Birds have been found with deformed beaks, legs, wings. In Oneida Lake, New York, walleye fish started appearing with tumors. This comes from exposure to chlorinated wastewater effluent. That's water discharged from treatment plants containing chlorine byproducts. So these chemicals don't break down easily and can build up in the lake. These tumors are obviously a sign that pollution in the lakes has carcinogenic effects, meaning it can cause cancer. Walleye are especially important too because they're popular for fishing, so this is worrying not only scientists but fishermen and the communities who depend on the lake. Back in the 70s, a coal-fired power plant in North Carolina started dumping wastewater full of selenium into Bellows Lake. Over time, it completely wrecked the fish population. By the early 2000s, the number of fish species in the lake dropped from 24 down to just 6. most of the fish couldn't reproduce anymore. One study found that 19 of the original 20 species couldn't produce any surviving offspring. Only smaller fish that ate plankton, like mosquito fish, managed to stick around. They weren't affected as badly by the selenium buildup. Eventually, the plant stopped dumping the waste into the lake in 1986. Levels of selenium in the water dropped way down, and they even restocked the lake with sport fish like bass and bluegill. But even 10 years later, the fish were still having trouble reproducing. That's because selenium sinks to the lake bed and slowly leaks back into the food chain, especially if storms stir up the sediment. To make things even worse, some illegally introduced Alabama bass in 2011. They started outcompeting the native bass, especially largemouth. Now state officials are trying to get rid of them by removing catch limits, but the damage is already being done. In the Great Lakes, especially Lake Ontario and Lake Michigan, scientists have seen lake trout hatching with strange deformities. They found fish with weird faces, swollen yolk sacs, which are the little sacs attached to fish embryos that hold the nutrients they need to grow, and they have bloated areas around the heart, symptoms known as blue sac disease. It's caused by exposure to dioxins and toxic chemicals that build up in the water over years from things like industrial waste and pesticides. These toxins settle in the sediment but work their way up the food chain. Fish at the top, like lake trout, get hit hardest because they eat smaller, contaminated fish. The damage mostly shows up in the embryos, so it's affecting reproduction more than anything else. Many of the baby fish just don't survive. These deformities were first spotted decades ago and are still showing up in areas where dioxin levels are high. Even though regulations have cut down on the amount of dioxins going into the lakes, the old contamination is still there. Now, we've talked about all the bad stuff going on with fish, but what about some interesting adaptations? Well, Atlantic tomcod in the Hudson River developed a mutation that lets them survive in waters full of toxins. For decades, the river was basically a chemical dumping ground. Chemicals that usually kill or will seriously harm fish, but scientists have noticed that tomcod have developed a genetic mutation that changed how they process pollutants. Normally, these chemicals get into a fish's cells and start causing damage, but this mutation messes with the pathway the pollutants usually use. Instead, the fish store the toxins in their fat, basically locking them away where they can't cause a whole lot of harm. This trait didn't show up everywhere. It's specific to tomcod that live in polluted water. The downside, though, is that these fish are now heavily specialized to survive in dirty, polluted water. If the environment changes again, even if it's for the better, they might not adapt fast enough. And they're still concerned about predators eating them and taking in those same toxins up the food chain, including people who eat the fish. Killfish are tiny, colorful fish found along the east coast, often in places no other fish would want to be, like New Jersey's Newark Bay or Virginia's Elizabeth River, where there's a lot of toxic waste. These areas are loaded with dioxins and heavy metals, but somehow killfish are doing pretty well, all things considered. Turns out they've evolved an insane resistance, up to 8,000 times more than normal. Researchers collected hundreds of killfish from different polluted sites and sequenced their genomes. And what they found was that each population had developed similar mutations in the same genes that basically turned off the normal response to these toxins. This kind of resistance is only possible because killfish have super high genetic diversity. For other species that don't have that kind of variation, adapting like this isn't really an option. Again though, there's still food for birds and bigger fish, so there's still a lot of worry as to how all that stored up pollution could affect the rest of the food chain.